So yeah, what I'll do is I'm going to get cracking. If people join in the meantime, that's obviously up to them. But let me just crack through this. If you have any questions, guys, do reach out to me while I'm going through it, because I'll be happy to answer them as we go along. Right. So let me just share my screen, and I'll jump straight into this. Okay. Okay, you should be able to see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good. So what this presentation is about, and I'll send it to you guys afterwards, is about persuasive presentation. I've often been asked to do presentation training, and I've always pushed back on that because I'm not a big fan of presenting with PowerPoints unless you know why you're doing it. So I am, however, a massive believer in the power of persuasion, and I've lived with that all of my life. And I started this presentation back about, believe it or not, 10 years ago, because I was being asked by people who wanted to present how to present like I presented, which is almost an impossible ask because of the fact that we all present in different ways and we all have different strengths and personalities, and you obviously have to play to your strengths if you're trying to persuade somebody of something. It has to come from you as an individual, so that's why. On the presentation here, you'll see some links to people like Barack Obama, John Hammond, Shia LaBeouf, Michelle Obama doing their presentation thing, because they're great examples of how to do it right and how to find your personality for presentation and persuasion. So if you haven't seen these, they're good links. It's worth sort of picking their notes and just thinking about what it is that they're doing well. But I think after this quick course, you're going to get to grips with that very quickly yourself. And of course, then you'll be probably looking at it for thought notes as to how you can adopt these styles and techniques compared to the way that people like Barack Obama does his presentation. Michelle Obama, of course, wife of Barack Obama. That must be a very interesting breakfast conversation when you've got two of the best presenters in the world around the same table eating toast. But there you go. Let's move on. So what we know from research that's been done, this came from Microsoft about 4 years ago, but effectively the attention span of a human on any particular subject is somewhere between 12 and 8 seconds. Actually, it was 12. It went down to 8 when they did that research. So I guess, by the time we get to a decade on, it's going to be 4 seconds. So that means that every 12 seconds, you have to reconnect with your audience to get them back focusing on what it is that you're talking about. So it's very easy for people to lose their way in an hour's worth of conversation. So that's why this is so important. Just one obvious thing that you'll notice about this slide is how little there is on it. Now, and also you'll notice it's dark. As well, we'll explain a bit more about why it's like that in just a second. But first to this. This is a reasonably famous footballer, Petr Cech. He was a Czech goalkeeper, used to play in the Premier League. And if you'll notice, he's got a very bizarre, bright shirt on. And when he was asked why he wore these weirdly bright coloured shirts, he said, I believe that it might put somebody off if they were seeing this colour coming towards them. Of course, that was very difficult to prove, but it's what they call in Formula One racing, when they're racing cars, a gram strategy, which is looking at what are the smallest things that you can do that may make an impact on your audience. And so whenever I'm doing a presentation, one of my immediate thoughts is, what's my gram strategy? Is there anything else I could be doing to actually persuade my audience of what I want to persuade them of? So in this quick presentation, why present at all? The role of us being as humans and how we think about presentation, business communications, secrets of persuasion, the journey, some worked examples, 10 different faces of persuasion that you could use, the 3 rooms that you persuade in, some quick tips on PowerPoint, some final thoughts and any questions that you've got. So it should be pretty quick. Right, so why present? Okay, well, there are lots of reasons why people present, producing and explaining reports, training, education, facilitation. But of course, fundamentally, whatever it is that you're doing, if you're standing in front of an audience or if you're writing a piece of paper, the point of that communication is to persuade somebody of something. Even if I look from a technology standpoint and we're looking at data, KPI dashboards, all of that is trying to persuade somebody of something. Oh, let's a second, let somebody in. So when we're looking at persuasion, I'm thinking, what actually is the takeaway of this thing I'm trying to persuade somebody to do? And first thing that comes in my mind is, do you really need to present? Do you really need to write 100 words when you could write 2 words? Because the laws of communication, if we're back to that sort of 12 to 8 second of communication, you haven't got long to make your point. So why on earth are you going to write a PowerPoint that's like 60 slides when effectively people only think for 8 seconds before they move on? But if you want to persuade somebody, you need to ultimately be convincing and you need to convince them. There has to be an argument somewhere in this that's going to persuade them. And it all comes back to this. We're all cave people at heart, and the way that we receive communications is driven by our senses. And as you will know, the most powerful sense that we've got is brightness that comes through our eyes. That kind of distracts us of everything. And that's one of the main reasons why, if you've actually got to make a point, one of the best ways of doing it is to have a dark slide, not a light slide, because a light slide is just going to focus the eye on the slide deck and not on the point that you're trying to make. Equally, if you're starting a presentation, it's very important to start with a dark deck because you want the audience to understand your personality and understand you as a presenter as much as you do the communication. So if we look at communication and humans, we know that humans are emotional, we're social, we like leaders, we appreciate people that lead, we mimic peers and their behaviors. So we have to wrap all of that in when we're actually looking at how we're communicating and how many people we're communicating with and what we're trying to persuade them of. And if we look at the priority of the senses, as I say, it starts with sight, but then it's hearing, taste, smell, touch. And if you are presenting, you can potentially use all of these instruments, and I'll explain and share with you how I've done that in the past. But also, one word of warning, you may or may not be aware that a high proportion, something like a third of men are red-green blind. Why is that? Well, because as the hunters, we needed to be able to see the animals and hide from them. And the red-green blindness helped us to identify movement when there was camouflage in the jungle and our prey was on the other side of it. Equally, women don't have red-green color blindness because when they were picking the berries back in the day, then it's thought that the people that did pick the wrong berries ended up dead, and therefore we had this natural separation of the red-green color blindness to be only an issue for men, not for women. But nevertheless, if you are presenting and you're particularly presenting in a green and red palette, it's worth thinking about because there's going to be a third of the men in the audience that can't see what it is that you're presenting. So business communications, when we're talking about business communications, which we genuinely are in this context, we have to start with the way that the brain thinks. And Daniel Kahneman, who was very much criticized for this book that he wrote called In Thinking Fast and Slow, he tried to simplify it by saying, look, there's basically a left brain and a right brain. We know all of that. And if you're in the fast brain, you're in that automatic, uncontrolled, effortless, emotional state. If you're in the right hand side of the brain, spend all your time there, then you're in the rule following state. If you are neurodivergent, the chances are you're switching between these states in a very high level to very extremes, which is one of the reasons why neurodivergent people have these tremendous challenges with mood swings, but also they're very disruptive, and they can understand paradigms because they're able to jump between these things. Whereas most humans that are neurotypical, they slowly start from somewhere and slowly move somewhere else. So as individuals, we all think differently. Of course we do. And we all use our fast and slow brain at different times. If you're communicating, though, you do need to be thinking about which brain you're communicating with. Do you want to keep people in that emotional state so that they buy on impulse? Or do you need to take them into a slow analytical state because you need to prove something to them and they need to prove it to themselves? So obviously that's going to influence the way that you present your communications. Equally, we have the Doblin Behavioral Toolkit, which is essentially a breakdown of how your brain thinks about stuff and is influenced. And so we've got preconceptions, assessments of what people are understanding, a reflection, how people think about the stuff that they've heard, and their self-identity and how they relate to what they've just heard. So these four major areas of how we interpret is critical if you're going to get your communications right and relate to your audience. So once you've actually worked out, again, what mode of thought process you want your audience to be in, you've thought about how you're going to tap into the behaviors of the brain and how they think about stuff, we might want to just simplify it down a bit if we're in the business space, because ultimately people buy stuff to get a job done better, or what we could call job to be done methodology. That's the bit at the bottom here. And the idea of the product or service that we're offering is we're trying to change the current behavior of our target audience towards a desired behavior. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to introduce the pains and the gains of the situation, and we're going to remove the habits and the anxieties that are getting in the way. So clearly, when you're talking, for example, about technology, then there is always going to be in the back of the mind of the person you're talking to anxieties and habits that they do today that are going to get in the way of them adopting whatever it is that you're selling. And you need to make sure the level of pain and the degree of gains that they get from your solution to the job that they want to do is going to offset the habits that they do today and the anxieties they have today. A great example would be a spreadsheet. Of course, people use spreadsheets by habit, and also they've got used to using them for many, many years to solve problems. And it's the last resort for pretty much every problem that people have got in business to work with data, to share information, to communicate, to capture data. And of course, if they can live with the pain, they're not going to move away from the spreadsheet. So there's a classic situation there. If you want to move somebody beyond a spreadsheet, you've got to remove the habit and the anxieties and replace it with positive rewards and relief of pain. Now, from a marketing perspective, we have a system that we use, one of our methods, which is called a proposition canvas. And that proposition canvas has a simple left and right. So on the left-hand side, it's how you think about your product as a producer of that product, and you're thinking about the features and the benefits that it offers. But then we're looking at the customer and how they see their problem, and they see their problem as jobs that I've got to do, pains of doing that job, and gains I could get by doing it in a different way. So we need to not talk in the vocabulary of the product. We need to talk in the vocabulary of the customer and the pain and the gain and the jobs that they're doing. If we do that, we're going to improve the way that we persuade them of stuff. So when we come to persuasion, the first thing, of course, to get this right is to plan. And so really, if you're writing a presentation, or you're standing in front of a customer, or you're just about to put pen to paper, the thing to think about is, what are you trying to convince somebody to do? Who are you trying to convince? And what is it that they need to do once you've persuaded them? So simple statement would help in this exercise. I need to convince this person that this argument is true so that they do this. So if I map this out, I could say, well, when I start to communicate with this individual. This is how they think. So how am I going to intervene? What interventions am I going to use? What instruments am I going to use to persuade them? And then how am I going to get them to a call to action? What is that call to action going to be? And then when I finish, how are they going to think about the point that I'm making to them? Now, Churchill did some pretty clever things in terms of communication, as you know, and he came up with these 5 elements of great oratory. Number 1, understand words, understand the exact appreciation of words, because words for copywriters are our instrument. Appreciate sound, and that people use diction and dialogue and dialect in different ways to communicate words, and that those changes to voice, levels of voice, pitch of voice, the level of sound will influence how they receive that information and how they feel about how they're receiving it. So sound's very, very important. The most important sound is silence. If you want to control an audience, silence is your friend. The steady accumulation of the argument needs to take place. Now, there's a separate methodology we use called pyramid arguments, and pyramid thinking, pyramid arguments are about setting out your argument so that you start with the problem that they've got with a problem statement, you prove it with 3 irrefutable points, you give them a solution, and you evidence that solution with 3 irrefutable points. That is essentially the most effective way of persuading somebody of anything. So if we're using a tender response to make our point, or we're doing a presentation, that pyramid thinking structure is very useful for us to adopt. Ultimately, we want to turn our words into visual mind thoughts of the person that we're talking to, the people we're communicating with. We want them to visualize what we're saying into something in their head. Now, that's quite challenging to do. Not every word that you use is a word that's going to spring up in their head as a visual thought. So if you say, let's say entrepreneur, that might mean something to somebody, but not to a lot of things. If you said camel, pretty much everybody's going to get what a camel is, you know. So when we're looking at our oratory, we've got to think about what words will connect with our audience that they can actually visualize in their head. So focus on relatable undesirables and the individual that you're talking to, the nature of that audience and their culture, where they're coming from, what their problems are, what sort of day they've had, and focus on how they think about stuff, and then focus on a relatable undesirable. And then we're going to make it either very painful, very scary, or very rewarding if they buy our product. So these are techniques that we use every day in copywriting and in presentation that really do start to make you think about, this is not that easy. Getting all of this stuff takes some time and takes some planning and takes some journey mapping out so that you can work out, how am I going to persuade my audience to act and do this? So let's look at landing a customer. This is a typical landing page journey that we would be using if we're trying to step somebody through that journey on a single landing page or a single piece of paper. We need to, again, have our proposition headline. We need to explain it so that they understand it and why we're different, that it cannot be copied or faked. We need to look at the benefits of the offer so that they could see the reward that they're getting from this. We want to communicate them in video if we can, and images, because they're easier to understand. We always will need social proof so that they can be persuaded that it's not just us that are saying this, that we have done this stuff before, and other people that are like them have experienced the success and results that we've promised. We always use a reinforcement statement if we've got lots to say about something, because it reminds people where their visual image was when we started. Again, we've only got 8 seconds to keep their attention. Sometimes you need to go back and pick up the thread. Finally, we're going to have a closing argument, and then we're going to have a call to action. And pretty much every good landing page in the world works this way. What we do know, though, if we're working online nowadays, we have to gift some of our value for the client to see it or the prospect to see it. They're not just going to come to us and start using our product. They need to be persuaded even to do that. So to start the conversation, we've got to gift some value, and then we've got to give them some extra reward to go take that next step and turn it into action. And that will ultimately, we hope, result in a lead. So we use these strategies called gift reward strategies so that when we're mapping out this conversational journey, we can work out how the best mechanism is going to be to do that. So what's the journey then? Well, it looks something like this. You normally always have to set the scene. You have to make it relatable so that the person or the people you're communicating with can visualize and be in the same room as you of what the pain is that you're experiencing and what you're trying to explain to them. It has to be relatable. And to do that, you need to set the scene. Any good storyteller, of course, is always going to outline the characters, outline the situation of that characters before they start jumping into the core of the story. Then we want to seduce these people to be persuaded. We can't force people to want to listen. We've got to get them to want to listen to what we're trying to say. And that's the difference between attraction and seduction. We've really got to get people to want to listen to what we're communicating before we do. Part of that is asking for permission so that they feel that they've consented to take that journey with you. So it's always a good idea before you start presentations to ask permission of the audience so that you can explain, at least explain what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and how long it's going to take. Persuasion, to be offered an irrefutable truth. So it's very useful in your arguments to make sure that when you're putting your proof points together, is it kind of persuasive? Is it irrefutable, or could people really just rip it to pieces? Of course, the best type of evidence that we have is social proof, is when somebody else says, yeah, I've used this and it's great. And of course, we've got tools as well to influence people. We're going to talk about those as well. So set your scene, think about how to bring people to the table, think about how you're going to prove your argument, and think about the tools that you're going to use. So let's just step through this. I'll go through these quite quickly. In fact, I might go through them very, very quickly. First step, scene setting, get the authority, explain the context of the conversation, and explain that you are in control by asking permission. Once somebody's given you permission to present, you've got consent. And you can always go back to them later if it starts to get rowdy and say, hang on, guys, you said you wanted to listen to this. Do you still want to listen to this? Because when we started, you said you did. Oh, sorry, I missed the last one there, which is really important as well. Don't forget the environment. It's really easy to show up for a presentation or a meeting, realize that you're in the middle of a busy Starbucks and it's really noisy and the machines are running behind you. There is no way you're going to keep the attention span of your audience if you don't get your environment right. So if it's not acceptable to you, either cancel the meeting or move the meeting until it is acceptable, but don't sell yourself short and have a difficult meeting in an awkward situation because you've just not set the environment and made sure it's the right environment to work in. Seduction. Okay, so these are the ones for seduction. Think about your purpose, what you're actually asking them to do. Consider the personality of the person that you're communicating with, and remember that you are also an important personality. The secret of persuasion is communication and personality. You need both. So if you just put information in front of people and they don't see you as an individual and they don't regard you as an important part of this journey of communication, then it is not going to land. You have to make sure you have communication and personality in the room. And you need to build out the proof pyramid that we talked about, the pyramid thinking argument, and you need to build that empathy with the audience in order to get belief in what you're saying to be true. In the area of persuasion, we've got to go through those steps of understanding what are the steps of the decision that they need to make. What are the undesirables that are in the back of their mind? What are the consequences of doing nothing? And then how are we going to close out on that argument to move them forward? So I'm a massive fan when you're trying to persuade somebody of something is you've got to start by understanding the audience, and you've got to understand what the undesirable is that's the kind of influencer in the room that's actually starting this journey, because without any sort of desirable or undesirable, people are never going to move from their present position. They've got to have a reason to want to do it. And if we talk about the tools that we could use, let's just go through those. So it begins with doing the planning and doing the rehearsing and getting the room. When I started doing this presentation, I spoke with one of the guys that attended afterwards, and I said, you know, what do you think of that training session I did? He said, yeah, it was all right. And I said, well, so what do you mean? He said, well, I just thought you did it naturally. I just thought you were a good presenter. And I said, well, no, that's just not how it works. Everybody, doesn't matter how good a presenter you are, if you want to persuade people of something, you have to do the rehearsal, because when you're actually doing the live event, you have to be in the room as well. You can't just be trying to read off your slides or trying to remember your script. You have to know that inside out in order to focus on your audience and to control the room. So there is no replacement for planning out your journeys and the steps, planning out understanding the script, making sure you know it inside out through rehearsal, and getting yourself prepared. Persuasion is very powerful. Persuasion is about setting a mental picture so that you're actually starting from a positive position for yourself. Very often this is used by insurance salespeople. So they'll say, look, you probably think me coming in here with my suit, this is going to cost you, you know, 10, 20,000 pounds for what I'm about to sell you. But I'm just going to tell you that isn't what's going to happen here today. And then when you come up with the price and you say, this is going to cost you 1,200 a year, they're thinking, wow, I thought, you know, in my head, I've got that sort of 10, 20,000 pounds sort of whizzing around. All of a sudden, I'm down to 1,200. That's cheap as chips. So again, persuasion is a very powerful technique. If you want to make a lot of pain, start big, set the expectation, and then just remind them that's not what it's going to be, and then go back to small. And the small may be very big when in their heads if you were to present it straight away, but it's very small once you've persuaded them that the actual price could have been very different. Asking permission is really important in you're going through the toolkit. So at some point you have to ask permission. If somebody wants to buy something, you definitely have to ask permission. One of the classics of being a sales guy is ask for the order, you know, to make sure that there's a clear commitment that they're going to proceed. Leading questions are actually useful when you're doing this kind of communication, because it leads the audience. Very often, again, even if you're nodding, people nod with you. I mean, this is the nature of humanity, you know, we do tend to like to follow. So leading questions are useful. They're not necessarily a bad thing. In the sales industry, it was deemed that leading questions are actually a sort of bad practice, but I'm not sure that they are if you're trying to persuade somebody to do something for you. So then we've got the 10 phases of persuasion. Let's talk through those very quickly. Let's talk about the nice ones, because there's some nasty ones as well. The first one is being a negotiator. Good negotiators don't negotiate on the big point to begin with. They start on the little points and work from the outside in. And sometimes when you're presenting, that's what you need to do. If you've got a big point to make, if you're going to land a big point, maybe the thing to do is not to start with that, because people will just say yes or no. If you're doing let's say a logo design, you share a series of logo designs with your audience, they'll just fix on the one that they like, and you'll never persuade them of anything else. If you actually go through the ones that what your thought process was behind that logo, and take them through the logic that you were thinking and the designs that you came up with, and then land with them the good design that you want to give them and why it's a good design, they're going to be on board by that time, and they will have adopted that same logo. But if you don't do that prep and you don't negotiate through the options of the choices and the direction that you went in, they'd never pick that logo. You know, not a hope in hell. Because once people make a decision, they don't like the loss of face of changing that decision. So you've bummed yourself out. You're too late. You have to do this in the right order. Next techniques, authority figure. People do actually respect authority. You know, the nature of kind of heroes against sidekicks is heroes just go and do it, and they might fail a few times, but we can all kind of relate to that they're trying to succeed on their journey, and they've just kind of had some knockdowns on the way. What we know is a sidekick always forgives him or herself, for not achieving because they never thought they would in the first place. So being an authority figure, we respect that, but you have to command authority. And part of that is the gravitas and the approach that you take to presenting and making sure that you are giving clear instructions, being the master of the ceremony and making sure that you are clearly in charge for that audience, because these people are humans and they respond to that sort of tribal environment. You have to make sure you're the guy standing up, or the girl standing up at the fire, in charge of the conversation. And again, being assertive is very important when you need it. Showing gravitas is very important. Being thoughtful about how you communicate, having pause. For women, it's particularly important to go into your lower register. For some reason, humans think that you have more power when you do. Think of Morgan Freeman. You know, he's always the voice of God because he's got the lowest voice. You know, so it's very important when we're thinking about how we present this stuff and how we persuade people. You always have to be the authority figure in the room. Now, to get to that authority figure, you might need to be an expert. The simple way of being an expert is to have 3 facts in your head that you know inside out. As soon as you repeat 3 facts in high detail, you are considered by your audience to be an expert. So do have your 3 handy facts, and that will help you to make sure that you are in charge because you have the authority, because you are the expert. Okay, if you want to be a leader, of course, you need to give direction. So it's very helpful to set direction when you're going through your story. Tell them something they don't already know is always very helpful to keep people entertained and on topic. Which is great reason why people, of course, are storytellers, is because you can use your personal experience to set that dialogue. And you need to constantly engage with your audience, sometimes inside your audience. So you need to be thinking about what sort of audience you are communicating with, and we'll talk about those 3 rooms later. But also, if you're in a big audience, you have a big audience, you've got group pressure there. You've got people looking at other people. If everybody's nodding, then everybody's going to nod some more. If people are disagreeing, they're going to disagree some more. If you get that horrid silence where everybody's looking lost, you're in trouble. You've not kept an eye on your audience, and you've not steered your audience in the direction you want to go. You've probably not asked permission, and you've probably not got them on board before you start your journey. The guru. A guru simplifies complex things with simple stories, and that's how we relate to stuff. That's how we learn things around the campfire, and it still holds true today. So being a good storyteller is about thinking about your own personal stories and making them relatable to the audience that you are communicating with. It's no good having stories that your audience cannot relate to, even if they're your personal stories. There has to be a bridge between your audience and the stories that you tell. The hypnotist. I've never done this myself. It's theoretically possible. It is certainly a form of persuasion, not one that I use. But again, it's very often with advertising, we use repetition. We use the same words consistently, not once, but many times in a short advert to hypnotize our audience to believe that to be true. And we do that in presentation as well. Keep going back and repeating the key point that you want the audience to understand. The friend, again, this is a style, it's a technique of presentation that some people do where they just got to get on board with the audience by being a close friend of the audience. That's great, provided that you can keep your authority. And being a friend and having authority at the same time isn't that easy to do. So it's great to share a joke and have a bit of humor, show a bit of charisma. But you have to be a pretty good presenter to be able to be the friend of the audience and the authority figure in the room at the same time. The actor, yeah, it's easy to use props. In one of the examples I've actually got here for you later, I used a toilet seat as a prop and a mobile phone, just to show the difference between the two, in the fact that humans are very bad at making judgments on risk, in that there are so many more germs on a toilet seat than there are on a mobile phone. Now, the toilet seat itself was a pretty impressive prop because obviously it raised a laugh. It got some conversation going about what I had a toilet seat and a phone in my hand for in the first place. But the other factor was it got everybody in that room engaged on this. And sometimes, actors, we use props. It's part of what we do to tell our story. And sometimes you need to do that to really make your point. I'd also say as an actor, we all get imposter syndrome. It's not just one or two people, everybody gets imposter syndrome. I mean, effectively, we all have that, but unless you're a narcissist, and perhaps they don't, but unless you're a narcissist, we all think to ourselves every now and again, how come I'm here? Why am I here? And in that situation, sometimes you literally have to just get yourself refreshed in the bathroom, and just look at yourself in the mirror and say, I can do this. I am acting this role today. And out you go and you act it. And sometimes that's the only way you can get through it, I think. So certainly acting is quite an important aspect of what we do. Anyway, the bad ones, these are ones I don't recommend that you use. They're not really good. Bullying. I've seen this on a stage where people have bullied people because they think it's the only way they're going to get somebody to do what they want them to do. Not a great plan. There are so many other ways that I've just shown you. There are 7 other ways to persuade somebody to do something. You don't have to put fear in the minds of the people that you're talking to. There are huge repercussions in doing that, so you don't want to be doing it. Number 1. All right, so extortionist. Yeah, people do this as well. We bribe people all the time. Think of the kind of bonus points and club cards. Everybody likes a good bit of bribing every now and again. The fact is, though, we don't want to be an extortionist. We don't want to bribe for gain. And particularly in the corporate environment, you could get into huge trouble doing that, not just for yourself, but also for your brand reputation. So not advised. The final one is to make it up, and people do that as well. I'm not a big fan of making stuff up. You almost always get caught out, especially in England, because we're so cynical. We will spend a living age trying to prove that you're wrong. So lying is never a good thing, I think. Ultimately, there's plenty of evidence on your side if you just go looking for it that will actually persuade somebody to do what you want them to do. So worked example, this is one I mentioned to you earlier with the toilet seat. I did really partly just because I wanted to demonstrate that you can use all of these techniques in a short presentation. This presentation took about 45 minutes. It was in front of something like 250 people, and I had to persuade them that information security was a very good thing for them to be selling when none of them were selling it at the moment, and they didn't have any plans to sell it at all. And by the time I left the room, I had to have persuaded them that that was the big thing that they wanted to be doing. So in this script, you'll see all of the mechanisms that I've just gone through with you are used in this script to persuade my audience to do what I want them to do when I finish this presentation. And it worked. And that was one of the reasons why I ended up doing this training course every 2-3 months after that, is for the fact that so many people heard about this particular presentation and wanted to do the same thing themselves in their own way. So yeah, I've just labeled all that up for you guys and girls so that you can see that there. So a quick worked example then for you. Oh, sorry, let me go through it. So in that worked example, I made an introduction. I gave my example of the mobiles. I explained the agenda so they could know which way I was going. I explained my interest in it and what I was doing and why it was important, some personal stories. I told them something I didn't already know, as in tell me something I don't already know. That's the TMSIDAK, so that they could think about it and engage and connect with it. I then used memory joggers to make sure that they remembered what I was telling them. I used my toilet seat to prove the point, and then I actually raised the appetite by acting on those thoughts. So that was basically the work through of that in overview. So the 3 rooms, you're going to be presenting to people in one of 3 places, and these are those. The one-to-ones and the small meetings. Well, that's great because you should be able to know the people that you're talking to. You should be able to remember their names, which is really handy. You should be able to look them between the eyes and make sure that they're all paying attention. You can give some thought to the sorts of people that are very brash and loud and want to command the room themselves, and also those people that are the submarines that don't say very much and probably have a lot of good things to say if you ask them. So really connecting with those individuals, understanding the personality types that you're working with, making sure that they are all engaged in the conversation, they're all given an opportunity to air their views and have their voice. Very easy to deal with. But again, there are some people who really fall to pieces when they're in this very intimate environment. Equally, we've then got the kind of middle groups where you've got a group of people that are more than the sort of 1, 2, 3, 10. You're now into the sort of 15, 20s. And now it's starting to get really difficult. You can't necessarily give everybody eye contact because there's just too many people. So you have to make sure when you're looking around that they feel that you're looking at them. And again, pick out the people as you're going around the audience and give everybody a bit of time. Make sure everybody's attentive. You need to be very, very busy with your eyes to make sure that you're touching everybody in the room. You need to start to gesticulate more with your hands because you've got a bigger audience and they need to see these visual movements more clearly. So again, we're getting a slightly different dynamic going on here, aren't we? We're actually saying because it's a bigger space, we've got more people, we can't work in the same way. We can't do those kind of one-to-one conversations and make it real to individuals. We have to now sort of look across the audience and make sure all of them feel that you're looking at them. I know people that really fall to pieces in that environment. And then we've got the big auditoriums where you've got 2, 3, 4, 500 people. And I think over anything over 100 and you're into this sort of space. And now you're really going to have to work for your money. Again, you're going to have to move, talk slower, gesticulate faster with your arms, move around the stage, but don't fidget. Make sure that you're really concentrating on not focusing on individual faces because there's just too many of them, but to set to the room so that you can actually focus on all of the spaces of the room and make sure you're not missing any. If you're getting interruptions, you need to take charge of that room because if it's a big room, it gets noisy really quickly. And don't forget, everybody will copy everybody else. If it starts to go horribly badly, then it's going to get even worse very quickly. So to bring control, silence. If you get stuck, silence and then start again. But use silence as your weapon if you need to bring control to the room. If you've already asked permission at the start to do your presentation and you've explained what you were going to do and you've got that permission, you can always retrace your steps and pick up that thread and take back your authority. Again, I think what this means is that there will be some people that think about this and think that's incredibly scary. But I know some people that love this environment but can't cope with rooms 1 and 2. So it's really important with all of these things, you get your environment right. Don't take on a gig unless you're absolutely sure the environment's going to be right for you first. It's your own fault if you've not made sure the environment is conducive for you to do your persuasive best. So just finishing off on the PowerPoint tips, because everybody asked me about the PowerPoint tips. The first thing is remember the kipper, which is if you think about a kipper, it's the head, it's the body, and the tail. So that's the basic structure of any persuasive presentation on a PowerPoint. You start with the argument, you then have interventions with proof points and evidence. So fact, evidence, fact, evidence, fact, evidence, summary, close, and then the tail is the what next. That's what you're heading towards. It's getting that commitment of your audience. Now, before you start the kipper, you really need to understand who your audience is to make sure that this is the presentation that is going to benefit them and that whatever you're trying to persuade them of, you've got the right people in the room first. There's no point jumping through all of these hoops and then realizing that your audience is not what you think it to be. Fewer slides, more time. I put tons on this one because I'm trying to get all of this stuff across to you in about 45, 50 minutes. But really, if you're doing a presentation, 12 to 16 slides is pretty much all you're going to get for a 45-minute presentation normally. So if you're trying to be successful at what you're doing, you're not going to get personality and communications in the room if option A, they're busy trying to digest all the text you've put on the slides, and option B, you haven't given your personality any time to shine. So you've got to give yourself room when you are presenting. MICE, this is McKinsey's whole ethos, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive points. If you're trying to summarize something, always do it in 3 points, omni, trium, perfectum, everything good in 3s. and make sure that each point is mutually exclusive of one another and collectively exhaustive. That is the way to get your evidence onto a slide in the most efficient way. Do bear in mind that with mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive points, when there are only three, very often you kind of come up with a fourth, fifth, or sixth. You're going to have to wrap those into three. So don't just kind of put the 5 points down, work out how those 5 points could become 3 points and envelope in the points that you're trying to make. If that didn't make any sense, I'll explain it to you one-to-one later. So what you show and how and what you say, it doesn't really matter what goes on your slide and what you say, it's what they hear, you know? So you have to be thinking about, are they hearing what I'm saying in the way that I want it, well, I'm trying to portray it, to persuade them of what I want them to do. Before you do anything with the slide deck, prepare your story in the notes. You don't have to jump straight onto the slides. You've now just created a whole confusing world for your brain when you're trying to design stuff and work out what your script is in the first place. Work out the persuasive argument that you're trying to do, then build it into the notes, and then take the notes and work out how you're going to portray that on a slide in the smallest possible way, and preferably with an image, or preferably not at all. Darker slides always leave space for you. So again, if you've got dark slides, it's going to help you to get your personality in the room. So don't use white backgrounds for everything, including the chapter breaks. Do go to dark if you can, at all possible, to give your personality time to shine. White space and information design rules apply. So when we talk about information design, it's just how many objects are on the page. And when we talk about human beings from the Western world, we read top left to bottom right in that order. So you want to make sure that your presentation starts in the top left and it goes down in a logical order to the bottom right, and the fewer objects on the page as possible. If you space items out, objects out, even if it was a line of text from 3 words into 3 separated words, you go from 1 visual object to 3 visual objects. So it's very important when you're thinking about your composition that you don't draw unnecessary lines, unnecessary bits of imagery. Keep it simple, keep it short, and keep it small. Pictures do paint 1,000 words, and it's so much easier for somebody to visualize something in their brain if you've just painted the picture for them already. So do use pictures when you can. And again, if you need to get the control of the room back, don't forget silence. Even if you've got stuff on the slide, if you need to, go to one of the holding slides and get the concentration back, and then go back or go forward. But don't just sit there with a big slide on the, behind you if you're trying to get control again. I hear this all the time. I'm sorry, it's so complicated. If your presentation is so busy because you made it that way, then that's on you. You shouldn't be communicating stuff just because you're going to send it to them afterwards. You should be communicating what you need to communicate in the point of work that you're doing. So a few final thoughts. You're better at this than you think you are. Ultimately, we are all persuasive. We're humans. We're designed to persuade. We were born to do it. But what you have to do is not try to emulate somebody else or somebody else's style. You need to come up with your own approach to persuasion. And you need to think about the instruments and tools that are going to work for you based on your personality. And you need to think about that personal brand. Now, tomorrow, I'm doing the corporate survival guide, which is at the same time. And that's really about understanding, how do you win in the business, in the corporate world? How do you become a winner in that environment? And part of that is realizing where your strengths are and how you could leverage those strengths. So that's me done. That's this one over and done with. So you've just learned all about how to persuade. You've learned all about how to present. You've learned a bit more about yourself, I hope, as you've gone through that. Any questions?